Welcome to the NHL Wraparound podcast featuring Neil Smith, President General Manager of the 1994 Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers, and longtime ESPN NHL veteran Vic Morren. Together, they share no-nonsense opinions on news and issues around the National Hockey League. Whether you're a casual or diehard fan, each episode of NHL Wraparound will leave you more informed. Now, here's your hosts, Neil and Vic.
Welcome to NHL Wraparound. Vic Morren, Neil Smith, and we're going to have a pretty memorable show coming up. Originally, we were supposed to have Bill Armstrong on, general manager of the Utah Mammoth. However, he was caught up in GM meetings and couldn't quite sync up schedules. But we think, Neil, we got a pretty good fill-in here. And I wouldn't even say he's a fill-in. He's the real show.
No, it's going to be great. Having Stan Fischler come on, who we've both known for many decades, and a memory and a recall like you won't believe when you hear him, because he's always been that way, always, with amazing recall. So I really look forward to that.
Before we get to Stan, 3 things you need to pay attention to. And number 1, we're going to talk about the Boston-Toronto game from Wednesday, because a couple of key storylines coming out of that. First of all, David Pastrnak scores his 400th career goal in the Bruins' 7th consecutive win. But also in that game, Auston Matthews left with a lower body injury. He was hit by Nikita Zadorov in the second period. Looked like the injury took place when he tried to return a hit to Zadorov, and no word yet on the severity of that injury. Goaltender Anthony Stolarz also left that game with an upper body injury. And this, I think, Neil, goes back even further into Saturday night's game, where Zadorov took out Scott Lawton with an open ice hit. So a lot of things continuing to compound for the Maple Leafs in a very problematic way. Defensively in the first period, they were absolutely disgraceful. On Wednesday, they took 6 penalties during the course of the game. Craig Berube is beside himself right now. And even though this is only a 3-game losing streak, coming off a 3-game winning streak, it feels a lot longer right now.
And it feels bad. There's nothing in their game that's going right. They were losing 3-1 at the end of the first period in Boston, and let David Pastrnak have a breakaway in the first minute of the second period to make the game 4-1 before you'd reached the 1-minute mark of the period. Now, they came back on as the game went on, but this was total lack of any kind of defensive discipline. They're just not clicking this year so far. And, we expect Toronto to be a slam dunk playoff team, along with, of course, the Florida Panthers, the Tampa Bay Lightning, and so on. But Toronto's in a lot of trouble right now. I don't know what they're going to do, but it doesn't feel right. What's going on there? There's something missing. When the players won't buy into the system and aren't performing the system the way the coach is preaching, you've got a real problem. And that's what's going on in Toronto right now.
Number 2, the Edmonton Oilers respond to that 9-1 drubbing that they had at the hands of the Colorado Avalanche on Saturday, with a 5-4 overtime win against Columbus on Monday. Connor McDavid in the third period, a virtuoso performance. And Jake Walman wound up tying that game on a fluke while the Oilers were shorthanded with 58 seconds left in regulation. And then Walman assisted on Jack Roslovic's overtime winner. The Oilers are going to start a 7-game road trip in Philadelphia on Wednesday. And you had said, even before that, getting on the road is probably going to help them because they're going to have some bonding time. But certainly going off on a win like that when they were down 2 goals in the third period to the Blue Jackets, that's got to be a little bit galvanizing for them.
No, it has to be really good for them to have to hop on the plane and fly to Philadelphia from Edmonton to start that road trip. But a lot of times on the road is when you get guys out, you have dinners together, you have time together. You're not, you're not at your house fixing the garage door or looking after the dog or the kids or the car or whatever. And sometimes teams can come together, and I would expect that this road trip would be that time. And if it isn't that time, Vic, then there is something really, really wrong in the soup in Edmonton.
We're certainly going to find a lot more out about this club and their aspirations to get to a third straight Stanley Cup final in the next 2 weeks. Number 3, on Wednesday, Gabriel Landeskog scored his first regular season goal since March 5th of 2022 in the Avs 4-1 win over Anaheim, snapping the Ducks' 7-game winning streak. Nathan MacKinnon, 3 assists. He leads the league in goals with 14, assists with 18, and of course, points with 32. Now, I thought this was going to be a real good acid test for the Ducks. And early in that game, it appeared that they were going to get blown out of the building. They managed to hang in, got their sea legs, were very competitive through the second period. Avs just a little bit too much, but I thought Anaheim really accounted well for themselves. And of course, let's also talk about the heroics of Landeskog finally getting a goal after all of the work that he put in to return over the last 2.5 years.
Well, he and Jonathan Toews are just amazing players that have come back through sitting out for trying to get themselves healthy for 2 years. Jonathan Toews, of course, in Winnipeg, and Gabriel Landeskog, who kept the captaincy all through the time he was missing and is still the captain of the Avalanche and very, very well respected by everybody in that locker room. As far as the Ducks go, I mean, I think that was still a good showing for the Ducks to play against a strong team like Colorado and look okay. They didn't look good in the beginning, as you said, but they came out okay. And they're developing into a playoff team right before our very eyes.
That'll wrap up 3 things you need to pay attention to. Now, get your history books out as we're joined by the Maven, Stan Fischler.
It's my pleasure to bring on to NHL Wraparound a very old friend of mine. Stan, we go back to 1980. That's 45 years ago when I met you. I had the pleasure to meet you. I was just a young, I don't know what I was, a young something. And I got to meet Stan Fischler, the famous Stan Fischler, who had been around a lot longer than me. And I'm so happy that you're still here with me, Stan, and welcome in. And thank you for doing this.
Well, first of all, when I interviewed you for the first time in 1980, I was already old. So what the hell am I now? I am beyond Methuselah. You know, that was great because I always like to do fresh faces and, you know, not the usual interviews all the time. And you were. And the other thing that was great about our relationship was I got to meet your mother. Your mother was one of the neatest people I ever met. And I have to say that she was funnier than me, but women, that's another category. But this is a great long friend, 1980. God, I can't even. That's another century we were together.
Absolutely. I mean, we met right during Jimmy Carter's presidency, right after the fact that the U.S. had won the gold medal in Lake Placid, and Ken Morrow was a fledgling college player trying to make it with the Islanders.
Yeah, well, one of my great predictions was Ken Morrow made his debut at Nassau Coliseum against Detroit. I believe it was a Sunday afternoon. Anyhow, whatever happened was at the end of the show, Jiggs McDonald came down to the studio. He was doing play-by-play, and he said, "Stan, what do you think of Sky Morrow?" And I said the same thing that I had said years earlier about Billy Smith. I said, this guy's not going to make it because he didn't. I said that about Chelios too. After he came from the Olympic team in '84. The first time I looked at these guys, they didn't look. What the hell do I told Lou Lamoriello a long time ago. I don't know anything about hockey, but I react as a fan. And as a fan, looking that day at Kenny Morrow, he was a spindly leg guy, and I said, well, he's not going to make it. So I'm 0 for 3. What are you going to do?
I wish you'd said that I wasn't going to make it.
Still here. As Bill Torrey used to say, I'm still fooling people.
Yeah.
Stan, we want to have you on today because there's a term that comes up probably more frequently than it should, and that is the generational player. And from my seat, it's something that is doled out way too liberally. In 2023, we heard it about Connor Bedard. 24, Macklin Celebrini. We're going to hear it next year with Gavin McKenna. You have seen thousands of games. You have seen tens and thousands of players. So we figured no better place to start with this discussion than with you, who has seen it all. And from your perspective, what is the definition of a generational player, and who truly should it apply to over the history of the NHL?
Well, first of all, you pointed out, Vic, people are very impetuous about making these statements. But my definition is a player who's greater than great and who has had a very, very unique impact on the game. Good example. Hockey got serious in 1926 when the American teams came into the NHL. And the guy who sold hockey to basically the New York MSG guys, they didn't even think they were going to have hockey in the old Garden. And Howie Morenz was the superstar. He was the Babe Ruth of hockey. And they brought a couple of the Garden guys like Tex Rickett up to see him play. And as soon as he saw Howie Morenz, this guy was so sensational. Speed, the whole thing, And he wasn't that big, but guys weren't that big in those days anyhow. Anyhow, when they took a look at Howie Morenz, they said, we'll go put hockey into the Garden. They put hockey into the Garden in 1925-26 with the New York Americans. And the New Yorkers took the hockey so great that the Garden then put the next team, their own team in 1926 was the Rangers. And you could say that the Rangers had a line, a generational line with the Cook brothers and Frank Boucher, and the Rangers immediately were better than the Americans. And of course, you had teams already in Boston, and then came Detroit and Chicago. But it goes back to Howie Morenz as the first generational player. And then if you wanted to look at a goalie, the Canadiens goaltender George Vezina, who trophy is named after, he was the first generational goalie. And I think he had something like 15 kids, so that made him a double generational goalie.
Those winters were cold in Montreal.
So you go from era to era. I always say it's impossible to compare guys, like who's the greatest hockey player? Well, are you going to tell me, that somebody from 1926, like Bill Cook, who arguably is the greatest Ranger right wing in history, that Andy Bathgate is better than Bill Cook, is impossible. It's like comparing a 1926 Ford with now a 2025. Everything about the game was different. Everything about the game. The skates were different. The sticks were different. The size was different. The whole thing was different. So right at the beginning, I would go with Howie Morenz.
Continue on through the eras, and then I'll bring Neil in because I want his list also.
I would say, in all fairness, you have to go by position. Mm-hmm. So Morenz was a forward, Vezina was a goalie, and the defenseman was definitely generational was Eddie Shore of the Bruins. Eddie Shore arguably was the toughest guy and the toughest guy at his position, which was defense, for the longest time. He came in with the Bruins and he put Boston on the map as a great hockey town. It's one of the greatest on the continent, if not the world. And he was sensational, and he was courageous beyond all belief. I'll tell you one quick Eddie Shore story. It tells you why. And the Bruins had a game in Montreal, and he was driving to the train station to join the team for the train trip to Montreal. And the cab he was in broke down, and there was a traffic jam, and he got late to the station. The train was pulling out. He was gone. So he had his best friend, who was a millionaire, who had a limousine and who was a chauffeur, and he told this guy to drive him to Montreal. Well, that was easy to say but hard to do because it was a blizzard. And suffice to say that halfway to Montreal, the chauffeur said, "To hell with this, I can't drive in this blizzard." And of course, they had to remove the window. In those days, anyhow, Shore drove the rest of the trip to Montreal. The car wound up in a ditch. They had to get a farmer to pull it out with a horse. And he arrived in Montreal about 4 or 5 in the afternoon. Art Ross says, "You're not playing tonight. Go to bed." And he told his roommate, "Throw water on me. Wake me up. I'm not going to miss the game." Eddie Shore played that night 58 out of the 60 minutes. The only 2 minutes he missed was for a penalty, scored the winning goal, and that, to me, is what was one of the greatest stories of all time. So this guy has to be it. He has to be one of the generational players. And then, you want to go into the 30s, you have to go with the guy who had the hardest shot in hockey. Now we look back and Bobby Hull's got the greatest shot. Now every guy, with the crazy sticks they have now, a 100-mile-an-hour shot is nothing. But Charlie Conacher was the Maple Leafs. He was the Maple Leafs star. And when they built Maple Leaf Gardens in 1932, in the middle of the Depression, and the Maple Leafs in 1931-32 had to sell hockey to fill this big arena. It was the biggest arena in Canada. And Charlie Conacher led the Leafs to the Stanley Cup in the first year that Maple Leaf Gardens was built. I mean, so he was a generational player at that time. And of course, you can pick a forward. The forward, it would have to be King Clancy, because King Clancy was a little guy as a defenseman, but he had more guts than you can believe. But how did he come to the Maple Leafs? This is one of the most unbelievable stories of all time. Yeah. He was playing for Ottawa. He was a star for Ottawa, a cup-winning star for Ottawa, but the Ottawa team was going broke and they needed money. So they made a deal. They said to the Maple Leafs guy, Connie Smythe, you want King Clancy? It's going to cost you, I forget the exact amount, something like $125,000, which of course today would be, millions. Anyhow, Connie Smythe had a horse named, I forget the horse's name. He had a crazy name. And the horse he had never won a race. Never won a race, and there was this big race, and he put his horse in a race. It was the longest of long shots, and he bet across the board, and the horse won the race. Won the race. So he had enough cash to begin with. Then he got a couple of guys to raise more. So that's how we got King Clancy. And King Clancy, they thought King Clancy wouldn't come to the Leafs because he hated Hap Day. They had a battle going. Hap Day was a great Leaf defenseman. And of course, Clancy said, I don't mind playing with Hap Day. So they got Clancy, and they had the great defenseman. And of course, he helped them win that cup in 32. And, we can go on era by era. But that's certainly, of the early 30s. And of course, Shore at that time was right. He was He was scary. Obviously, one of the stories is he nearly killed a player on Ace Bailey on the Leafs. Ace Bailey was given up for dead. Actually, he was hit from behind by Shaw, but Shaw, came back. He paid his dues, and Ace Bailey survived, although he never played again. So you got these guys were generational, and then you get to the middle, the middle of the 30s, and Detroit won 2 cups in a row, and they also had a great line, but they had a guy you don't hear about today named Marty Barry, and Marty Barry was the guy who engineered the basic guy for the Red Wings, and of course come to the Rangers winning the cup in 1940, and that's a tough call. That's a tough call because the Rangers hadn't won the cup since '33, and they didn't have anybody that was as generational as the Cook brothers. They were still there, but but in 1940 they had a phenomenal goalie, Davy Kerr. Davy Kerr was fantastic. He was the first hockey player to have his mug on Time magazine. And I've never been on a Time magazine. I haven't even been on Mad magazine, for crying out loud. But Davy Kerr was great. And of all the stupid things, Neil would never have done this. After they won the cup, he wanted a $500 raise from Lester Patrick, and Lester didn't give it to him, and he got very angry, and he wound up retiring. And when they finished first in 42, Sugar Jim Henry was the goalie, but Sugar Jim was not Sugar Jim had a generational nickname. I mean, there isn't a single other hockey player I know who's a Sugar. I don't know if you guys do, but But moving on, you have to say Bobby Orr. Got to be Bobby Orr. Now, Bill Chadwick, who was the great New York, and he was a generational referee. He has to be in this list because you know why? People won't believe this, okay? But Bill Chadwick was the best referee in hockey, and he only had one eye. Now, can you imagine me walking, refereeing a game like this? He had one eye, and he lost his eye in a hockey accident. And he was a very good player. He might have made it to Rangers. He was on the Rovers when he had to retire. So he was a fantastic referee. We all know how tough refereeing is, and we always complain about the referees. But I once asked Bill. I said, Bill, what is the secret to great refereeing? And he said 2 words: common sense. So if they all threw the stupid rule book away and just did common sense, it might be the way to do it. So Chadwick is there. Then we got to go to Bobby Orr.
Yeah.
Because Bobby Orr, I don't know how Neil feels about him, but Chadwick told me he's the greatest player that he had ever seen up until, we got to go right into the 72 finals with the Rangers, the Bruins, and the difference in that final was that Bobby Orr was the difference.
Yep.
In fact, Chadwick was on the radio. I remember listening to the radio driving to the Garden for Game 6, and I mean, how can you say anything but Bobby Orr, really? And he wasn't. He was like a regular guy. You won't believe this. You won't believe this. But I was doing a story on him for Sport Magazine, and his agent was Alan Eagleson, who we all know what happened to Eagleson. But I was pals with Eagleson because we brought Eagleson to the New York Hockey Writers when he was becoming a big shot. And he said, you meet Bobby Orr at Maple Leaf Gardens. He's going to be treated for his knee. This was September. And he was already a superstar, right? And Bobby will take you up to his place his family's place in Parry Sound. You can do the interview there. And anyhow, between the interviews, that night, it so happened that Georgian Bay had millions and millions of, lots and lots of islanders, and the Oars had this tiny island in. And Bobby, his father, and his brother took me on their little motorboat to the island, and at midnight, we went skinny dipping. Can you believe that? In Georgian Bay. And then we went into the homemade sauna that they had. I don't know how many other guys can make that statement. So Bobby Orr isn't my generational because he let me skinny dipping, but because of what he did. And he's defense, and we got to talk about Bobby Hull. I mean, I can't tell you how bad the Blackhawks were before you guys were born. They were awful. They were awful. People don't realize that the NHL had tough times when Tiffy came in, and Chicago was pathetic. And they developed the farm team. They got guys with dough, the Wirtz family, and they built a farm team in St. Catharines, a junior team. And they got you could say, I don't know what you guys allow with your definition. You could say there were two generational players simultaneously. It was Hull and Makita, and they were as different as black and chartreuse. I mean, Bobby Hull was Bobby Orr was glamorous too, but Bobby Hull played the glamour part to the nth degree.
Yeah.
Nth degree. Can I tell you a story about how he played it he loved his glamour. I did a very lovely story about him for Pageant magazine, and they were playing at the Garden about a week after the magazine came out. They beat the Rangers. I go into the dressing room, and he starts yelling at me. The guy is yelling at me. I said, what are you upset about? He says, the magazine. I said, what about the magazine? I wrote a very nice piece about you. He said, no, the big picture had me without any teeth in my mouth. I said, Bobby, I wasn't in charge of the photo, okay? So you had Hull with the great shot, the curved stick. Of course, these guys introduced the banana blade, which was a whole generational thing right there. And then you had Stan Mikita, who went from being one of the dirtiest players in the league to winning the Lady Bing Trophy. This is incredible. I mean, if anybody had seen, Makita was as dirty as anybody in the league while being great.
Yeah.
Also, Gordie Howe. I shouldn't have skipped over Howe. So I shouldn't have skipped over two guys. I shouldn't have skipped over Rocket Richard, and I shouldn't have skipped over Howe. Rocket couldn't make the Canadians for the first 2 years because he was always getting hurt. They said the guy was too brittle. Well, he unbrittled in his third year, and he wound up scoring 50 goals in 50 games. Imagine 50 goals in 50 games, and this guy used to be brittle. And of course, the Rocket was so strong. The Rocket, Glenn Hall, when he was a goalie for the Blackhawks, and he said when the Rocket came coming in on him, his eyes looked like searchlights. He intimidated just with his eyes. Cat Francis was a goalie with the Blackhawks, and he told me that Rocket scored a goal on him with two guys hanging over his shoulders. Johnny Mariucci being one of them. I think Ralph Natras was the other one. So the Rocket, I mean, they got a trophy for him, right?
Yeah.
They do, for top goal scorer in the league. So,
and then Gordie Howe. I'll tell you this. In the 1950s, it was like a great argument. We used to have arguments. Who's better, Mickey Mantle or Willie Mays or Duke Snyder, but the Dodgers, Yankees, and the Giants? So the big argument was, who's better, the Rocket on the Canadians or Gordie Howe on the Red Wings? Now, you got to remember, Gordie Howe came up in 46. The Rocket already was a star, and Gordie didn't really become a star maybe about 48, 49, certainly by 49, 50. But at that time, the Rocket was in his prime, and Gordie was totally different player. And the Rocket, the great thing about the Rocket, he never BS'd it. I'm the greatest. He always said that I was not that good a hockey player, but I worked harder at it than the others. And he always gave Gordy credit. So they were two different guys. And of course, Howe then had to be the generational guy because he missed the cup in 50 only because he had been badly hurt. But that team in 51, 52, I saw them at Maple Leaf Gardens against the Leafs in the first round. I mean, they won the first round. It broke my heart because I was a Leaf fan. They beat the Leafs 4 straight. Okay, the Leafs were defending champions. Then they played the Canadiens and they beat them in 4 straight. They won the playoffs in 8 straight games, and Gordie Howe. In that game, I just have to tell you one quick story. The Leafs were losing something like, it was like 4-1 or 5-1. The game was over. And Gordie Howe got a breakaway on Turk Broder, who was Leaf goalie. And I'll never forget this. He went on and he was like fooling around, He was fooling around. He put the deke on Broder. He had an open. He said, I'm seeing what this is what he's thinking. I'm going to see if I can bank the puck off the right goalpost and put it in. And he banked it off the goalpost, but it didn't go in. But then he scored another one, and they won 6-2. So Gordie Howe. That's and then the goalie has to be Turk Broder because he won 5 Stanley Cups. And how many goalies can you say 5 Stanley Cups?
Yeah.
And going from goalie to goalie. We got Bobby Hull and Makita, had to be Glenn Hall. Now, you can say Terry Sawchuk before him because Sawchuk he used to crouch. No other goalies crouched. And the reason why he crouched was he said they could see the puck between the legs. So we go with Sawchuk. Okay, Broder, 5 cups, to Sawchuk, and to Hall. And Hall is my choice as the most heroic goalie of all time. 502 consecutive games without a mask, not including the playoffs.
And he won. Throwing up before most of those, if I recall.
Definitely. And he forced himself. He said he forced himself. He wanted to clear his stomach.
Well, he did. Well, I want to get to Neil for a sec here. And Neil, I want you to pick up on this because Stan has certainly taken us through roughly 4 into 5 decades of history. But for you, how do you define a generational player? And let's pick up from where Stan left off into the 1960s. And who are the players that you have seen since then that would truly earn that generational title?
Well, let me start by talking about the 60s, because that's when I started to understand hockey as a kid. Yep. And it was amazing. In the original 6, it seemed like every team had their star player, and most of them were number 9. I mean, Stan will remember this. Almost every team, it was like a thing then. If you were the star, you wore number 9. So you had Rocket Richard, of course, in Montreal, who was basically, winding down by the time the 60s started. Then you had Gordie Howe, number 9 in Detroit. Then you had Bobby Hull, number 9 in Chicago. Then you had Andy Bathgate, number 9 in New York.
Yeah.
And Toronto didn't have a big number 9 star player, but they did have a number 27, which was the highest number anybody had ever worn in the NHL. And Frank Mahovlich, the big M, wore number 27. And then on Boston, I think Stan will agree, when Boston started to turn the corner back to respectability is when Johnny Busick showed up. And Johnny Busick, of course, what number was he? Number 9. Who was the guy who carried the cup around Madison Square Garden when they won the cup in 1972 was, of course, Johnny Busick, if you remember that. So I just wanted to say that was my memories of the original 6, along with Jean Beliveau, by the way. I shouldn't leave out Jean Beliveau, the great number 4 on the Montreal Canadiens. Now, getting to generational player, I think that my definition is a guy who dominates the league and dominates every game, that you can't go to a game and not notice that he's playing in the game. That's my definition of a generational player. And the ones that that I've been lucky enough to see and to experience over my lifetime, past the original six, let's say, out of that era, definitely Bobby Orr was the first player I ever saw that totally dominated the game, changed the game. You know, it was almost unfair how good he was. And of course, this was a defenseman. And like a defenseman, what's he doing rushing the puck up the ice? You're not supposed to do that. Leo Boyven doesn't do that. And so that's the first generational player I ever saw. And then we get, you go further down the line, and Gordie Howe, of course, was a generational player who came, he sort of mixed into those because he played till he was 50 years old. So he was, Gordie Howe was around a bunch of eras. But after Bobby Orr in his prime, let's take guys in their prime as generational players, because I think that's what we're speaking about. Bobby Orr came out of Oshawa. He joins Boston. They become a force because he is an unbelievable league-wide phenom. The next one to me was Gretzky, because it changed the game. Like when Gretzky was playing for Edmonton and as a kid against it in 79-80, that first year, I mean, he dominated the games. You couldn't, he'd get the puck and you'd say, like, this is not fair. No, they get 3 or 4 scoring chances every time he's on the ice. Like the other team can't even do anything. He was so good. And then after him, for me, came the Mario Lemieux, who was just startlingly good. But the thing about Lemieux was he was also 6'4", and it was our mindset that 6'4" guys couldn't be that good because they were too gangly and they couldn't maneuver the puck as well as others. Well, Mario Lemieux had the hands and the depthness and the quickness and everything of any little guy, and was just magnificent to watch. That's why they called him Mario the Magnificent. So he was another one for me, generational player. I think after that, I got to go to Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin, who, of course, are still playing in the league and have played in the league for 20 years. We've been all blessed to watch those two guys play. What a great rivalry they've had. And then today, the only generational player past Crosby and Ovechkin is obviously Connor McDavid, who can seem to do whatever he wants in any game. And I don't think you could go to an Oiler game in any building in any of the cities in the league and not notice 97 by the end of the game. You would have to see 97 do something spectacular. So Vic and Stan, for me, that's my definition of a generational player, a guy who dominates the game. And the reason I don't think that Bedard or Celebrini, they'll be great players, all-stars, Hall of Famers. But these other people that we just talked about, at 18 years old, they came in and were magnificent. I mean, Gretzky, Lemieux, even Crosby, although the Penguins were down on their luck at that point when he got into the league. Certainly, McDavid was great right away. These guys, and I'm not saying that Celebrini and Bedard have to be dominating the league, but they have to be doing things that you're like, oh my goodness, wow. So I right now, my prediction for those two is they're going to be a little bit of a notch behind the McDavids and the Crosbys and the Ovechkins. I could be wrong, and maybe they'll be, they'll come up there, but that's my definition of a generational player. I don't like the term, Stan, to be honest with you. We never had that term until it seems like Bedard's draft. Like we started with this, well, this is a generational guy. And when having not seen Bedard play in Regina, but having heard all the stories about him, I thought he'd be able to do that to some degree in the NHL. And that first year, in my mind anyways, he wasn't able to do that. He's a small little guy. He got hurt that first year, if you remember, by a crushing check by Brendan Smith in New Jersey. And, he it's taken up till this season now when he's sort of figuring it out and knowing what he can do and what he can't do at that size, because he is diminutive. He is not big at all. If he's 5'9", I'm 7 foot.
Well, the kid on the island they're talking about is generational, Matthew Schaefer. I've already heard that about him, but we're only a month of the season.
I've seen him play all the home games for them, 10, I don't know how many they played, and he is going to be a great player, and he's very good right now. Like, I got to tell you, right now he could play on almost anybody's power play. He's the way he can carry the puck, his vision. Right now he's that good at 18, and he's a defenseman, which is even harder than anything, is to be an 18-year-old defenseman. The last great 18-year-old defenseman I remember is Aaron Ekblad, who came in and was great for Florida, won Rookie of the Year. I don't see how the Schaefer kid doesn't win Rookie of the Year this year. He plays 20 minutes a game. He's on the power play. He kills penalties. He's just for Stan. I know you haven't probably seen him as much, but he's not Dennis Potvin. He's first overall as a defenseman for the Islanders, but he's not Dennis Potvin. He's not going to be able to, hip check somebody into the glass. He's not going to be able to fight anybody. He's not going to be able to do all the stuff that Dennis did, both defensively and then offensively. But he is so gifted in his skating. He's a gazelle. He is a absolute gazelle on blades. And, I'm sure he's going to be a star in the league.
I want to just address with both of you that you have hit all of the players that I actually had on my list, so there's no reason to go through them in terms of the true generational players. And one other note here, Neil, before I move on, is the number 9 for Toronto. How about Normie Ullman? Because he wore 16 and 7 in Detroit. He did wear number 9 in Toronto, as Stan would remember. But, just quickly, my definition of generational player is somebody that not only produces at an elite level, but a player who alters the way the opposition has to play against them. So kind of coming full circle here, Stan, all of the players that we had mentioned, from Morren's all the way up to McDavid, have had those qualities. And even though Bedard, Celebrini coming along, and we can go to Auston Matthews, we can go to Nikita Kucherov, we can talk about Nathan McKinnon, none of these players quite fit into that mold of generational players that you and Neil had mentioned. Do you agree?
Well, I agree with you, and I had a great respect for Normie Ullman, but there's one guy who, as far as I know, never did it. Nobody ever did what Red Kelly did. Red Kelly was a fantastic defenseman, a rushing defenseman. He was doing what Bobby Orr did on a lower scale for the Red Wings on defense. A great, great defenseman. Won, cups and cups. And then he gets traded to Toronto, and Punch Imlach takes this old guy and he says, look, I want to make you a center. And Red Kelly says, I've been a defenseman. He says, no, I want you to be a center because you're going to go up against the great John Belleville. And what do you think this guy did? Red Kelly won 4 cups with the Maple Leafs as a center.
Yeah.
Defenseman. I don't know who else did that, and of course those Maple Leafs, that team and that 4-cup team was an unbelievable successor to their previous 4-cup team when they won 4 out of 5 in the late 40s into 50s. Great player, Red Kelly.
Let me jump back in, Vic, on this number 9 thing, because this is one of my little idiosyncrasies on numbers and stuff. So the number 9s that I mentioned, all were homegrown number 9s. Okay, let me go back through them. Richard, Gordie Howe, Bobby Hull, Andy Bathgate, John Busick. They all started with that organization you named them from.
Yeah.
Toronto had two great number 9s, but it was later in their career when they had gotten traded there. Normie Ullman and Andy Bathgate. Andy Bathgate came and wore number 9 for Toronto for a time. So, but they never had a homegrown star number 9.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, I have to remind you that before you were born, when I was I was 15 years old. Ted Kennedy won the Stanley Cup for the Maple Leafs in 1945, and then he won the cup with them in 47, 48, and 49, and he became the captain when Sillaps retired. So he became the captain in 48, 49, and he played on 5 cup winners. And he was from Port Colborne, Ontario. So I gotta think he was homegrown.
Yeah, it sure is, and that's before my time. You're right.
Grown in the basement of Maple Leaf Gardens, but that's pretty close.
Stan, while we're on numbers here, you've done over 100 books in your career, which started with, I believe, Gordie Howe was the first book that you had ever written. I am privileged to say that you and I collaborated on 2 books in the 1980s when I had tinted glasses, a mustache, and a hell of a lot more up top than I'm showing right now. But what's the latest project that you've just released?
Well, I have not done a book for the last couple of years. The last book that I collaborated on with David Kolb and Zachary Weinstock was a 50-year history of the Islanders. And I haven't, I never added up how many books I've done. Sometimes I'm surprised when I see a book that I've done that I forgot about. But, when I look back, my wife Shirley and I collaborated, and we did before there was a hockey encyclopedia like the baseball encyclopedia that Macmillan did. Macmillan wanted us to do a hockey encyclopedia, and Shirley knew computers when they were new. I still don't know computers when they're old, and she really did the encyclopedia, that hockey encyclopedia, which was a landmark thing. But and as I said, I'm very surprised now because I'm doing a story on a book I did. I did a book with Boom Boom Jeffrey on, who was one of my all-time favorite people and players, and I did a book with the Rocket, and I did a book with Brad Park, but the fact that I did a book with the Rocket, I can't believe I did a book with the Rocket. And a French Canadian guy came up to me maybe about 20 years ago, and he said, "How come you did a book with the Rocket? None of us French Canadian writers did a book with the Rocket." And I said, "Well, I asked Rocket first." And that's how I did the book with the Rocket. But I would say, picking a favorite book is like picking favorite players by eras. I mean, the 2 greatest interview people I ever did was Don Cherry. I did Don Cherry's book, Grapes. He's done books after that. And I did Derek Sanderson's book, I've Got to Be Me. And Derek Sanderson was an unbelievable storyteller. Cherry was the greatest when I did the book. I mean, he just went on and on. But to do the Sanderson book, I have to tell you, Shirley and I went to Boston, and Derek had a ritual. Before we were going to do interviews for the book, we had to have dinner with him and 2 of his buddies from the Red Sox, Yastrzemski and some other guy. Then after we had dinner with him, which was already 10:30, we had to go to his apartment. And at 11 o'clock, we start doing the interview. And this guy had this technique of smoking. He would be smoking a cigarette, but he'd have another cigarette ready when this one went half done, and he chain smoked for 2 hours. But he was fantastic. I just want to add something to what Neil was talking about with how phenomenal Orr was and Gretzky was. But before them, when Howe was in his prime, I remember when I was working for the Rangers in 54, 55, Howe was in his prime, and they had a joke. They said, why does he play that funny kind of game? Talking about Howe. Why does he play that funny kind of game? What do you mean, the funny kind of game? He doesn't let anybody else touch the puck. And when Gretzky came up, Neil, I couldn't figure out. I used to think this guy had a secret compartment under the ice, and all of a sudden he appears, he's doing these crazy things. And he was skinny.
Yeah.
And so, you're right. You had to watch these guys. And of course, McDavid now, a magician.
Stan, before we let you go, tell us about Tales of Brooklyn and also the podcast that drops on every Tuesday that you're working on with Lena Sicheva and Jerry Hack.
Well, first of all, my Tales of Brooklyn are 36 stories about growing in Brooklyn, street games, the Dodgers at Ebbets Field, being in home front in World War II. But I have one of my favorite chapters. I was a crazy Maple Leaf fan. And I don't think there anybody could top me in terms of just pure craziness. And I was so crazy when they were winning in 50-51, after they won their fourth cup in 5 days. We lived in a 3-story house, my grandparents, my Aunt Helen, my parents, and me. And everybody was away for that particular weekend. I was so crazy that I went to a paint store and I got a can of white paint, a can of royal blue paint. I got a couple of hockey sticks, and I painted the garage wall. It was a big garage wall in the backyard, all white. And then I painted a royal blue maple leaf with cross sticks and a puck. And when my grandparents came home, there's a Yiddish word for what they wanted to. The word was I could plot when they looked at it, meaning I could drop dead from what's saying. But I got away with it. And years later, when I did a tour of the neighborhood and the neighborhood was going apart, I could still, the house was down, but the two sides were up, and I could see right through to the wall, and those maple leaves was still there. But that's one of my my favorite stories in Tales of Brooklyn. So this gal, Alina Sikova from Toronto, and this guy from Vancouver, actually my buddy from Vancouver, Jerry Hack, he wrote to me a couple of months ago, and he said, this gal from Toronto wants to do a podcast. Are you interested? I said, well, I love to talk hockey, so why not? So we're doing it. It's called Bottle Rocket, and it's moving along. But, we're having fun, and I'm allowed to tell a joke at the end of every story. So I'm totally fulfilled.
I'm just hoping that your most recent guest didn't bring the show down.
You were the star. You got out of 5 stars, Vic, you got 6.
Too kind. And just want to thank you so much for joining Neil and me this afternoon for this, not only clarifying what we/you believe is the generational players in the history of the National Hockey League, but bringing so much more scope to just everything regarding this topic. And what can we say? We love you. Stay well, and join us again before the playoffs start, because I think there's a ton of stories that we want to hear from that.
I'll tell you a quickie. The Blackhawks have just won the cup. I was there, And I was in the little press room. There was a blizzard in Detroit, so they couldn't fly to Chicago. And they were all celebrating. My hero was Glenn Hall, and I was doing a story about him. And I was all excited. Chicago won the cup, and this is the first cup of Glenn. And I rush over to Glenn, standing in the corner like a goalie with a beer in his hand. I said, Glenn, you guys just won the cup. What do you have to say? And he said 2 words, I'm enthused. And that's how I feel about you two guys in this show. I was very enthused to schmooze with you.
Well, Stan, I got to just add one last thing to you. We had Scotty Bowman on here, and I mean, I tell everybody how sharp Scotty Bowman is. Amazing. And his memory going way back to the 30s and all the rest. You know, I think you just outdid him on this show. So I just want to, that's a major, major compliment. Probably the biggest one I can give you is whatever your secret is to stay this sharp this long, please pass it on to me and Vic, because you're amazing.
It's oatmeal.
That's simple. Stan, thanks again. Neil, we both know Stan Fischler well over 4 decades. And yet I kind of sit and listen in awe at, as you had said, the recall, the breadth of knowledge, the players that he brings up. And I got to tell you, I had Howie Morenz actually on my early list of these generational players. But Eddie Shore, Charlie Conacher, King Clancy, it is a history lesson to be treasured.
You know, I said at the end there that comparing him and Scotty Bowman, which I think is a really good comparison. And when Stan was on with us and we started talking, you know, yeah, he looks older than he did look. We all do. But he's the same guy that I remember all these decades, the same recall, the same memory, talks about this, you know, the old days, can go way, way back in history, back to when the league began, and start talking about all the different players and teams and everything. It's just amazing. And, you know, God bless him. He gives you hope as you go through your life. And we all age. We're all a little bit older now than we were when this show started. And, you know, that gives you hope that, you know, look, I mean, he's in his 90s and he's so sharp. I'm just blown away.
93. And the level of enthusiasm, the twinkle in the eye when he's telling these stories is, he keeps giving that gift to us.
Oh, absolutely. And no different, Vic, than he did with me in Nassau Coliseum when I first knew him, when he was doing Sports Channel. And, you know, I'd go in and talk to him for a while. He came out with a joke and be sharp and talk about things. He loved my mother because my mother, you know, now would be 106. And of course, that's why you know, Stan got along with her because she could recall all those Charlie Conachers and King Clancy's, and, you know, when Maple Leaf Gardens was built in the 30s during the Depression, and built for $1 million, by the way. That's all that cost to build Maple Leaf Gardens. So tremendous. I'm really glad we got the privilege of having him on here.
Stan started as a publicist for the Rangers in 1954. And that's a good segue into some other news, because the New York Rangers have finally won a game at home, a 6-3 victory over Nashville on Monday. Those 6 goals equaled their total of their first 7 games in which they started at MSG at 0-6-1. Vincent Trocheck, I guess he's going to win the Hart Trophy because he comes back after a 14-game absence. Comes up with 2 assists, it's a +2, 4 penalty minutes. So at least for one night, things went well for the Rangers at the Garden.
You know what? There was 2 things that the Rangers needed to accomplish this. They needed Trocheck back. I really believe he is a catalyst in his own way. But the other thing they needed was an opponent like Nashville. That's what they needed. They needed somebody in there that they could spank, because the other teams that have come in, even when they went into overtime, San Jose is not an easy win. San Jose, those young guys are just are not going to quit. And so they got up against a team, and maybe this will give them some juice for going forward. I don't particularly think so, because I still don't think they've got the quality of players they need in all the different areas. But we'll see. But give Trocheck all the credit he deserves after that 14-game absence. And also, the Rangers stepped up. So there's hope at the Garden that this can continue now.
Their roster may not be championship caliber, and I'm in agreement. I don't think it is. But that Nashville roster is really rough. But I do want to give a shout out to Matthew Wood, the first pick for the Predators in 2023. He scored all 3 goals for the Preds in that 6-3 loss. Let's hit another item here. Brad Marchand, 5-game goal scoring streak, had a goal and an assist in a 3-2 win for the Panthers Vegas. It's a rematch of the 2023 Stanley Cup final. Big win for the Panthers. They salvaged their 4-game road trip at 2-2-0. Marchand is up to 11 goals this season, tied for 4th in the NHL. And the contribution that he is making has become so vitally important for the Panthers with all of the injuries that they have had. And he's a top liner in Boston for all those years, and his importance is now becoming equally evident in South Florida.
He's been great for them ever since he got there at the trading deadline last year. He was great in the playoffs. He took whatever role he was given by Paul Maurice, which during the playoffs was a dynamite third line that the Panthers had that probably propelled them to their second Stanley Cup. And with the captain, Alex Barkov, out of the lineup, arguably their best player, Matthew Tkachuk, also out of the lineup so far all season. He stepped up when they really need him. And it's an amazing testament to him. There was a lot of naysayers out there thinking that his best days were behind him. Well, they've got to eat some crow now, because Brad Marchand has been just spectacular.
The Florida Panthers are currently sitting with a record of 8-7-1, 6th place in the Atlantic Division. But you have to think that things are going to start to get a little bit better, because they start a run of 11 of 12 at home on Thursday against the Washington Capitals. One other note before we hit injury news, because the Panthers are going to come up again in that part of our show. NHL Chief Security Officer Jared Maples spoke at the GM meetings on Tuesday regarding recent gambling scandals in the NBA and MLB. And it was just a reminder to all that were present about being careful about divulging injury information and just being mindful of the do's and don'ts. And I think as we look at the other 3 major sports, and I'm going to include football here, that hockey by and large has been able to stay out of the headlines here is important. And so Maple's message is certainly vital through this period of prop bets and all this other stuff that can go wrong. I think really getting a refresher course was important for everybody.
Well, maybe for the GMs it was, but the people that need it are the players. The players are the ones that are the young guys that are going to get caught up in this. And if the league didn't want to have this happen, they shouldn't have gotten in bed with gambling. So, it's one thing for this guy to go in and talk to the GMs at the meetings. They hear it all. They go to sleep in their hotel room. The players are the ones, and it's going to happen. Sooner or later, it's going to happen. There's going to be somebody in a 32-team league that can't resist tipping his buddy off to some injury or something that's going on. And this should never have happened, that the leagues got into bed with gambling. That's my take.
Hopefully that message trickles down to the players and is emphasized in the strongest possible terms. Injury update. Yuri Kulik, forward for the Buffalo Sabres, will miss a significant amount of time due to a blood clot issue. Remember, we also reported a couple of days ago about Penguins forward Philip Hallander having a blood clot in his leg. He's going to miss 3 months. But Kulich is expected to return this season, but it'll probably be next month before the team knows for certain. He has 3 goals and 5 points in 12 games this season. Charles Alexis Legault, out 3 to 4 months, surgery to repair torn tendons in his right hand. He was cut by the skate of Nick Robertson of the Maple Leafs. And, I think if there is one thing that kind of skeeves all of us out, it's the skate cut.
But Vic, this skate cut was because there was a fight, right?
Yeah.
So there's a fight over by the bench. Everybody piles in. This guy's knocked down, and his bare hands are down there around skates, and that's why it happened. It's important to know that this wasn't just some freak thing. He was on the ice. And, he either got stepped on or ran his hand across a blade. And it's dangerous down there. When you don't have hockey gloves on, that's a dangerous place to have your hands.
And that's another defenseman that goes down for the Carolina Hurricanes. Jacob Slavin and Jalen Chatfield remain out. Gostisbehere did return on Tuesday in the loss of the Washington Capitals. But only Sean Walker and Alexander Nikishin, the only 2 backliners that have played all 16 games for the Canes thus far. For the Florida Panthers, we just mentioned it before, and now another long-term injury. Jonah Gadjevich had surgery for an upper body injury originally suffered October 25th in Vegas. He is out 3 months, so when the Panthers go out, they go out. And we don't talk weeks with them. We talk months because, as you mentioned before, Barkov, Tkachuk, Thomas Nosek, and Dmitry Kulikov also out months as opposed to weeks.
And you got to wonder if going to the finals 3 years in a row, as the Panthers have done, is wearing on them at this point. It's not for sure that that's the reason that they're getting these injuries, but one to think about how much hockey this team has played over the last 3 years.
Another team that's played a ton of hockey over the last couple of years, the Edmonton Oilers. And there are 3 injury notes here. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins to miss a week with an undisclosed injury suffered Saturday versus Colorado. Remember that word, undisclosed. Kasperi Kapanen, forward to LTIR with an undisclosed injury, suffered on October 19th in Detroit. But Matthias Janmark made his season debut on Monday. He returns from a undisclosed injury. Notice the theme there?
Yes, a lot of things being undisclosed.
Couple of other notes. William Macklin, forward for the San Jose Shark, returned to the lineup after missing 4 games with a lower body injury. He was present in the overtime win for the Sharks in Minnesota on Wednesday. Thomas Chabot, the Ottawa Senators, left Tuesday's game with Dallas after absorbing a hit from Colin Blackwell. And Thatcher Demko, goaltender for the Vancouver Canucks, left Tuesday's loss to Winnipeg with a lower body injury. He stuffed 5 of 8 shots in the first period, didn't return for the second. He sat out over the weekend, but then deemed himself ready to play on Monday. And this is a guy that has had a hard time staying healthy. And if Vancouver is going to stay around the bubble this year, they need him.
They sure do. And just a footnote to the Thomas Chabot injury, he has been ruled out for Thursday's game that Ottawa is playing.
Any other notes?
There should be an update on Nichushkin later today on the extent of his lower body injury suffered in Tuesday's game.
And that against the Anaheim Ducks. So a good note there. As we know, on Tuesday, it was Veterans Day in the United States, Remembrance Day in Canada, and teams all across the NHL did a great job honoring and recognizing our veterans. And I wanted to pull out one story that came out of all of the games on Tuesday evening. Stan Nelson, 105-year-old Navy veteran, served for the U.S. in World War II. He got the game going last night in Minnesota by yelling out, "Let's play hockey." He is believed to be the oldest living World War II veteran in Minnesota. But his story doesn't end there by a long shot. He was assigned to a landing craft infantry on Omaha Beach as part of the Normandy invasion. On June 6, 1944, he and his crew transported 250 men at a time to the beach, 8,000 in all, under heavy fire from German artillery and machine gun emplacements. That is the definition of a true hero and truly encapsulates everybody that was honored, both from the United States services and from the Canadian Armed Forces as well.
And remember, when World War II ended in 1945, Stan Nelson was 25 years old.
And truly special to see him being honored at the Wild Sharks game on Tuesday. That will close our show for today. Special thanks to the Maven, Stan Fischler, for joining us.
Yeah, that's for sure. And thanks to the listeners for listening, watchers for watching on YouTube. Reach us individually at our email addresses, which is neil@nhlwraparound.com or vic@nhlwraparound.com. Our podcast goes out on all platforms, so you can listen to it on Apple Podcasts, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and, of course, the aforementioned YouTube.
Our website, nhlwraparound.com, where our complete history of podcasts is available. We also have New York Centric, latest piece by Patrick Hoffman, The Hot Start by the Islanders' Bo Horvat. So check that out. We also have Neil's Nuggets and Smith's Picks. You were now 30 games over 500.
Yeah, I mean, it's getting tougher, though. 2-1-1. What was that last night? 2-1-2. 2-1-2 last night. It's tough. It's not easy picking this year. The teams are such good parity.
Love the content that we're delivering, folks. Please subscribe. We'll be back with short shifts on Friday and next Monday before we return with another edition of NHL Wraparound November 19th. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for joining us on the NHL Wraparound podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all the NHL action.